with caution. The beat, it doesn't match the rhythm. When the words make no sense, that's when their meaning's more intense. Humble actions, they breed ego. Irony, I just can't let go. You might say that I'm a one-trick pony, but at least I'm not here being phony. At least I know what side I am on. At least I know what side I am on. You're probably wondering what I'm saying. Is it just the game with words I'm playing? If I went all out, I'd be all in. And like damaged goods, I'd just keep breaking. But at least I know what side I am on. But at least I know what side I am on. Dance and skirt around the issue, ships that sail at night with no crew. We hunger for a sense of passion, but that's all gone out of fashion. These things that matter, just an excuse to find new things we can abuse. At least I know what side I am on. At least I know what side I am on. At least I know what side I am on. At least I know what side I am on.
Hello everyone and welcome to this month's edition of The Word. We're delighted to have Austin Duffy here to join us for the February edition. This is in association with the BA in Writing and Literature at ATU Sligo. Austin Duffy is a critically acclaimed author of 3 novels, his new book, The Night Interns, 10 Days, and This Living an Immortal Thing, which I know is hugely popular here in our library. Austin will be in conversation with Elske Rahill of the BA in Writing and Literature at ATU Sligo. Elske is a Dublin-born novelist and short story writer. She teaches on the Writing and Literature course. This conversation will be followed by an audience Q&A, which you're all welcome to join into, and then we'll have a open mic part as well. Music tonight is with Wayne O'Connor. Wayne is a local artist and performer hailing originally from Wexford. With a wide range of influences and after a long period away from music, Wayne is returning to playing in the public and sees the Word as a good opportunity to air some new and old material. And I think from the start of it so far, we're doing okay to get a chance to listen to this. So I'm now going to officially hand you over to Elske, who's going to officially introduce Austin. Thank you.
What more will I say? We're here to talk about your latest book. But for those who don't know Austin's work, Austin's an oncologist now living in Howth, right, from Dundalk. And I think your work has your job work, the other job, has affected your work.
The one that makes money.
The one that makes more money, yeah. has affected your work from the very beginning. So it's something that's kind of, certainly the first novel and this novel, I suppose are very much about all kinds of things, but about working with the body, the human body, and and disease and confronting mortality and all those things. I suppose to maybe focus on this book, and we'll talk a little bit more about the others as we go on. Well, actually, no, I am going to end up talking about the first one now. But your first book is set sort of much later in life than this book. So this book is about a young intern, really, experiencing a hospital setting for the first time, and there's a kind of bewilderment almost, I think, throughout the book. I suppose one thing that struck me is the structure. And it took me a while to notice why I was feeling so claustrophobic and rushed. But it's a good thing, it's intentional. But there are no chapters. And I know he goes home once, and it's a paragraph about this big where he goes home. And I was thinking, that's where you'd have a new chapter. And then to contrast that with your earlier books, where each chapter is a very neat, evenly paced section, and sets out, I suppose, time from the very beginning. So it begins saying, Henrietta's days are numbered. So we have a very strong sense of pace and time, and the idea that we're within something quite tightly constrained. And this book, you've done something quite, I think, brave, because it's not a pleasant read. I'm not saying the first one's a pleasant read, but it's delivered in parcels that are digestible. Whereas you've created something quite different here. And I wonder if we could maybe talk about that a little bit, and then maybe you could read a little bit to demonstrate what I mean.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with your analysis. So for those, I know you mentioned it, I am a working doctor, and after you qualify leave college, the first year really in your medical career is when you're an intern and you're working the night shift and working these really long shifts, and it's very difficult. It's personally, particularly for myself, I enjoyed college a lot, but I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't very studious. I got by, and I really found that experience of becoming an intern and actually having a specific job to do. Been interacting with patients, sick folks, and having to look after them, or at least, know something, what you're about a little bit. I found it very difficult, and it was kind of the word I would use, and I think I might be stealing this from one of the reviews of it, but it was an immersive experience. Yeah. It was immersive. That can't think of, well, I can think of a few other words, but that one really captures it. Because you're launched into this very, foreign environment for all of us, particularly for patients, but it's also foreign for the people who work there and are getting used to it. And you're working these long shifts. You don't really get any fresh air, and then there's those environments can be very dysfunctional in some ways as well, and I kind of wanted the reader to experience all of that.
I'm not saying, I know exactly how you felt, but I think we do. I think it has that effect on the reader.
I wanted the reader to be on call the way I was, and I still had, this is, by the way, 25 years ago, and yet my memories of that year are much more vivid than probably the memories I'd have of what I did last week,
Yeah, I was going to ask you because the first novel is kind of very carefully composed, I think, and it's about what we were saying earlier on. It's kind of the same character, no name, an unnamed character, very close, first person. What made you then return to an earlier stage? Is it something that you just always?
Yes, so there's a few things to say about this. So first of all, you're right in terms of the way that the first book is an older character. It's the same character at a more advanced stage in their career, I guess, at a different point where they're actually going into this laboratory in New York, where they're essentially going to escape from looking after folks and being exposed to that sort of level of human suffering on a day-to-day basis. And the character there goes into a laboratory, as a way of kind of really drilling down on life and really, really escaping, And the novel is written, it intentionally contains a fair amount of jargon because I wanted to mimic a sort of a research protocol, without hopefully not putting people off too much, and presenting it in that sort of format. This book is very different because it's now the same character, but at a much earlier stage when he is first exposed, to this type of experience, and he's just like, it's like he's just thrown in at the deep end, And the technical question there was, as to make it immersive, just like the actual experience was, and to get at some of the issues that you can get at true fiction that you can't necessarily get at true nonfiction. But in this, claustrophobic way, I hope I'm not putting people off.
No, it's actually very good.
but yes, that was kind of the intention. I wanted people to live that experience, and I don't think I told you this, but the stimulus for the book was another book. And when I tell you this now, you're going to think I'm totally nuts, probably. But I read a book by a French writer called Hubert Mingarelli, and he's a writer. He died the year before last. I was very sad to find out because I would have loved to meet him. But he wrote a book called A Meal in Winter, and it's a book about, and you're going to think this is really odd, but it's about 4 SS officers working three SS officers working in a death camp in Poland, and they spend a night away from the camp where they're trying to escape from their horrible duties, and they're wandering around in the forest basically. And it's an utterly compelling book, a meditation on human nature. It totally humanizes these individuals. That's the great thing about it. And they're obviously working in this murderous, very dysfunctional, is not the right word, system. But there was something about the experience of reading that book which made me think, I should set this in a hospital. I'm not comparing them. Obviously, in a hospital, you're trying to do good, you're trying to help people, and the subject of that book was the total opposite, right? But there was something about this dynamic of recognizably human characters who were tiny cogs in this system that in that case was murderous. But they're small, these tiny constituent parts of a system that they've absolutely no control over, and their interactions, and so that was kind of the stimulus for sort of wanting to take that type of dynamic and setting it, in the context of this really super intense intern year that I lived through and still really vividly remember.
I think that's fascinating, and it is. I can completely see actually how that translates, because there are a lot of questions of ethics and responsibility and duty going on here, and there's a sense that this character is quite helpless in a way. Even questioning his abilities sometimes. And like I don't know how to do that, or and I think that makes perfect sense. I don't know if that's a bit depressing to say, but it does.
I think it's an important thing to say. To be honest with you, that's kind of my. I know we're here to talk about writing and fiction and stuff. In my day job, and I don't know how much you want to get into that, but in my day job, that's kind of my approach. You have to have a humility, and when you're dealing with these issues, because of the uncertainties that are there and that you just have to acknowledge. And I spend a lot of time, trying to communicate that uncertainty in a way that's not, it doesn't add to
devastating.
Exactly, because there's a balance to be struck there, But but I think that communication piece is probably it is the most important aspect of my job on a day-to-day basis, and I think, that was one of the things I wanted to get across in the book, and to go into it in a way that might make it more accessible and sort of improve understanding on that level.
Yeah, and I think you used the word immersive, and I think that's definitely what you've done here. And I wonder if something that contributes to that he is kind of faceless, nameless. He's just doing. You know, he's just doing or trying to do. But there's something interesting about the dynamic between the three characters. You almost feel like not even the dynamic, but the differences between them. So the Linda character, who's so highly efficient, has sort of a glint of psychopathy about her as well.
Oh, do you think?
I thought so. You know, like, and she's better at her job in some ways because she's got that coldness. She goes off skiing after. Do you know, was that not intentional? Sorry.
So psychopathic might be a bit strong, but I know where you're coming from.
You know that,
yeah,
like,
totally. Yeah, totally.
Would you like to read a little bit so people know what we're on
Yes,
about, in case
sure.
you haven't read it yet?
Okay. So maybe I'll just read initially anyway the first short section, and which, you know, pretty graphically describes one of the experiences that as a newly minted doctor you're liable to come across in the middle of the night, and nothing really prepares you for it, and or certainly not in my day. One of the things I'm always conscious of is the fact that the book is set in the present, but it's obviously motivated by my own experiences, which were 25 years ago, right? So many things have, you would have thought, moved on. Actually, as an aside, I was invited to do a book club with the current interns in Beaumont Hospital just a few months ago, and I was expecting them to tell me how out of date the book was, you know, but I was both relieved and kind of very disappointed to find out that that wasn't really one of their criticisms, and it really resonated with them, you know. But anyway, so this is from the Night Interns, and the opening section, actually. Her face, we agreed, could only be described as serene. There were no lines on it. The tightness of pain was gone. Her worried eyes were now closed. None of us had wanted to enter the room in the first place. She's chain stoking, the nurse told us as we stood outside it. Linda was annoyed that they had called us at all. I mean, what did they expect us to do about it? She pushed past Stuart and me and opened the door. We had no choice but to follow her into the room. Sure enough, the woman's breathing had entered that unnatural rhythm. Up until then, we had only read about it, but here it was happening right in front of us, pre-death in all its glory. It was louder than we would have imagined, a slow but very deep grunting, like a beached sea creature drowning in oxygen. Not very human, frankly. Even Linda was taken aback. For a few seconds, the three of us stood looking at the woman from the bottom of the bed. Her face was a perfect mask, already far gone, but the chest didn't know it yet and was heaving away of its own accord. It was as if her disguise had been removed, the body stripped to reveal the alien presence at its core, what all along had been propelling it. The family were spread around the periphery of the room. They were watching us, and it felt like we should do something, or at least say something to them. But there we stood, as lost as they were. Finally, Linda stepped forward, uncoiling her stethoscope. She listened to the woman's lungs and looked into her mouth with her pen torch. It was no easy thing to pry open her jaws. Linda's confidence amazed us. Afterwards, we asked her what she had seen, and she said nothing, of course, just blackness. She said something to the nurse and then to the woman's family about trying to make her more comfortable, and they seemed okay with that. It was a relief when somehow the door opened behind us and we backed out of the room, Stuart and I bowing like geishas. Linda's pager went off and we followed her to the nurse's station while she answered it. "The food's here," she said, putting down the phone. The nurses had a few more jobs to us, nothing major, just charting stuff. We did whatever they asked, and when we were finished, Linda told them not to call us again unless it was absolutely necessary. We left the ward and headed to the stairwell by St. Patrick Dunn's ward that would take us down to the ground floor. From there, we would make our way back to the res.
Thank you. So I think that does give a very clear sense of how the book kind of works, and even setting up all these characters. You know, I think we're right there in the experience. I suppose this is leading on from the question of why now? You know, why did you need to write about this now? I mean, something we talked about a little bit earlier was this relationship between fiction and non-fiction. So, of your 3 novels to date, 2 of them are set in somewhere you're very familiar. So you're writing what you know, I suppose.
Right.
And I wonder, I suppose what I want to talk about really is why use fiction? Why do we need this device? So, so in the first novel, I can see how you've set up certain themes very clearly, like the themes of genetics. So you have, is it BRCA? Is it BRCA? Is it
BRCA? Yeah.
BRCA, and you have Down syndrome, and you've these kind of themes coming through, or and infertility and all those things. Themes. So I can see why it's very clear in something like that how fiction is useful to set up resonances. You know, that might not always, they often do, but always occur in one time and place within the length of a novel. And in this book, you have fictionalized things, but you haven't sort of tried to adhere to a clear story structure, which I think, again, is something that supports that sense of it just keeps going. Like you go home for a weekend and then you're back and it's still people living and dying and, you know, and never reaches an end or a conclusion. So in terms of using fiction rather than plain fact, you know, instead of it being about you, it's about this character, so it's slightly adjacent. Just wonder what you, like, how you feel that works for you to...
Oh, I think it's in a very important distinction, and it's something I feel strongly about in that, you know, for instance, it goes a little bit back to what we were talking about at the start and the use of this word immersive. I don't think you can really get there with nonfiction, or at least not, it's a different, I'm not knocking nonfiction, obviously, that would be ridiculous, but by approaching a topic, whether it's in this case an intern's experience, the experience of patients, the experience of staff in a hospital setting, but it could be anything. It allows you to get to places that you just couldn't get to in nonfiction. Now, the nonfiction folks can get to places that you can't get to as a fiction writer. You know, you know, particularly with regard to medical facts and various arcana and you know, different things that I'd like to go in that might have a particularly interesting history or something like that. Or, you know, you're obviously limited in what you can do there in terms of fiction. Whereas if you're writing a non-fiction book, well, you could have a whole chapter on the derivation or the history of whatever, you know. So, you know, so there are obviously pros and cons, but I very much feel that if you're trying to get at that, if you're trying to create a particular type of experience for the reader, and that's very much what I was trying to do on all 3 books actually, but I think most glaringly in this one, I don't think I could get to that. I don't think I could put the reader in that same spot if I was writing kind of like a diary or you know, a very however I chose to do it, some sort of factual account, you know, as I guess you could in some ways, but the fiction piece allows you to really get behind that the narrator's experience so that they inhabit it in a way that you might get close to in a non-fiction setting, but not to the same extent. At least I don't think. I mean, perhaps others would disagree, and that's fine. But that's kind of my take on it.
It's really interesting, actually, because it's you're sort of saying you need fiction to achieve the authenticity and the immediacy that I'm trying to achieve. So I know this experience, but it takes that kind of composition or that art to actually bring your reader straight into sort of an interface with that experience.
Yeah, and obviously they're highly it's not like one is better than the other, which
but that's
would be
what
ridiculous.
you've used. That's what you've chosen to
in this situation. Yeah, I guess I did pick one, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I did put a stake in the ground and say I'm on the fiction. I'm on the fiction side. There are a lot of medics writing non-fiction books. There's seems to be a whole wave of them at the moment, and they're great. You know, some of them, you know. I don't read a lot of them because it's just too close to my work day anyway, you know, and I have to read a lot as part of my work. But you know, they're doing fantastic work and very important work in terms of trying to, open understanding, which is so important. We saw this during COVID, obviously, but just across the board, we need to be better. Now I've got my medical hat on, but we need to be better at communicating. And, and so I think that whole non-fiction medical writing industry is doing a good job there, but I think that you can get at some of that on the fiction end of things as well. And that's kind of what I'm just more interested in as well,
It's a big question, right? But I suppose what I found myself wondering reading this is, I think a lot about, or at the moment I'm thinking a lot about what drives us to write. Okay, and I was thinking, who is this for? So these patients that are actually fictional patients, but and I don't mean who is it for as in who is your reader, but who are you sort of trying to do right by, or who are you? Does that make sense? What I'm asking there?
It totally does.
I was thinking a bit about the ethics of that, of how we write about our experiences and the people we meet and all of that. And I'm wondering, is that something you kind of consciously do? Like, do you have an experience and think, I somehow want to honor this person or this experience? Or
to be perfectly honest, not really. I'd have to be quite honest about that. Or at least I might rephrase it, because if I was to think like that, that sounds a lot more noble than I actually am, and yourself. I mean, you're trying to produce these things, they're hard work, and you want them to be as honest you want them to be as good as possible, as honest as possible. That's all you think about when you're working on it. Now, obviously, yes, it does. You do some, particularly when you're approaching publication and all of that. I did very much think, oh, what if someone thinks this or someone thinks that? But during the actual writing, no, I was viciously pursuing the thing to make it as good as possible. I just have to be perfectly honest about that. Now, I don't use, in terms of the ethics that you touched on, for sure, I can genuinely say I do not use any particular specific clinical situation that I encountered in my day-to-day job and say, oh, that would make a really good section or something like that. It just doesn't work like that. A lot of the everything in this book, every word of it would be recognizable to people who've spent any time in hospitals, no matter what you were doing there. And but that's not to say that it came specifically from certain things, because there's a sort of a commonality of experience. There's different things that happen across the board in many different circumstances. And when you're working on characters, as you well know, they sort of develop a life of their own. That's what you're after, isn't it? To do that. And if you were to set out to actually mimic a certain situation, first of all, it wouldn't really work, and second of all, it wouldn't end up as being that situation. It would gravitate into something else. Where I do come across it sometimes is people, and I get this all the time, they think they recognize people in the books, not at the patient level, but people, characters working in the hospitals. I get that a lot. I can really say that, and they're always wrong, but it is always kind of uncomfortable when you get that, because you're like, I would never even have occurred. Some people say to me all the, oh, that's your man, isn't it? Or that's your one. And it would be someone I hadn't thought about in 20 years, and you're like, no. And of course, the louder you protest,
I know, the more.
Oh, yeah, definitely,
I think, though your characters are so vivid that, I don't work in that professional. I felt like I recognized that, those kind of people, and the descriptions of the body language and everything, I think, are so vivid that I can definitely see how someone would think it must be based on this person.
I'm denying all intent and knowledge, but
so you're obviously extremely busy because you have another job as well.
Right.
But I wonder if we could talk a little bit about your actual process or writing routine. I mean, when do you write? When do you find time to write? Do you take breaks? Or?
So I'm a total creature of habit. I write in the morning time. I live in Howth. I work in the Mater Hospital, so I get the dart in every day, which is so guaranteed, 30 minutes work, 25 minutes work. And then this is it just shows you how nuts you know this, how nuts you have to be a writer. Sometimes I go, 15 minutes early, and I'm that Egypt, on the platform on my laptop, and then I might even get an earlier dart, and that allows me to maybe call into a Starbucks. There's a Starbucks on, on Talbot Street, I think, where you might find me on any given morning. And so if I do that, I like to do that every day if I can, and depending on my work schedule, but I can usually manage it. I just have to get up a wee bit earlier or whatever. And right there, that bit of mundane, information there, if you add that up, that's an hour and 15 minutes or whatever it is. And then, my kids are of an age where I seem to be a professional chauffeur at the moment. And so there's another, my son plays soccer Monday, Thursday. I'm, again, the guy in the laptop out in the car, so that's another 45 minutes each, and it kind of adds up. And I love that about writing. I just find that so optimistic.
Happens in the end.
And your stuff gets better, My wife's an artist. She's a painter, and she works so hard at her stuff. She really does. But it's a constant. It's very difficult to it's easy to get a painting to a certain level, but to go that final 2% is very, very difficult. And she's constantly say, "Oh, I had it, and then I ruined it," and that never happens with writing. It always gets better. The more, it might not be good. I'm not saying it's good, but it's always
you can
moving.
Always make it,
It might never be publishable, but it's always moving in that direction, and I've always found that really optimistic. And small increments every day, and. The job thing comes up a lot. It's kind of the question everyone asks. How do you write these books? I think look at it totally the opposite. I think it's an advantage to have something totally different. So then when I'm there, I run to it, and I'm on it, and I'm working, and I'm 110% focused. I would find it very difficult if my day job was in writing in some form, and then sort of extract, I don't know if this is the right word, but extracting yourself from that and then getting into your own stuff.
Because you're using the same bits.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I would find that very difficult. I think it's a tremendous advantage for me to have. First of all, I like my job. I mean, I'm lucky there. I'm very privileged. I'm not like doing a mindless task where I just feel on value. You know what I mean? And so that would be a totally different situation. I actually like my job. I like my career. I'm very interested in it. It's very compelling and very challenging on multiple levels. So I'm aware of that sort of privilege, but it also pays the bills. It covers the mortgage, so that's a major stressor that's removed, and also I get all this material. I get this actual stuff I can write about and that people are interested in, and there's a utility to it, because I do think we need to be better at talking about this stuff.
Yeah, so there is kind of a drive there to. I know you don't want me to project any noble causes on you, but there is a drive to.
They'd be well off the mark.
Right. Yeah, but to communicate something that you feel needs to be communicated. Would you say is that?
I think so, but again, I have to be honest. That it's not like I sit down and say, okay, now I have to go and communicate something.
Yeah,
I have to get this message out there that really needs to. It evolves, over. I don't know how it is for you, but for me, might start with an image or something. And then my second book, I just had an image of a father and daughter on a plane, and then who knows?
I was going to ask that where it starts. So it's not the big idea; it's the moment, and then you go from.
Yeah, this book started exactly with the scene I just mentioned. That moment of coming into a room. That's basically where it started, and then where is it going to go from there? Well, you don't know at the time, but it takes a few years to find out yourself,
And do you always write forward? Is that how you've written all your books from? So that was actually literally the opening scene of the book, and then you took it forward. Is that usually how you write, or have you ever started somewhere and had to work back? And
no, I think actually each of them, and my next book actually, now that I think about it, all start with page one is kind of there early on actually. But it's not like, I certainly don't, what word I don't understand the meaning of is the word draft. People say sometimes, how many...
Don't tell the students.
Oh, sorry. What I mean is almost, when people say how many drafts were there, I have no idea, because it's a continual sort of, I don't know what terminology you would use, but it's like this emulsion that's kind of swelling, from the center out. And
I think some people, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I know some people, I think, write, and some writing advice has given this, where you just write from the beginning straight to the end. I certainly don't do. I'm sure that I'm sure that works for
some
people.
Some people do, and it works really well for some people. Or some people plot out and then. Yeah,
I could never do that. I tried because I read all those writing advices like everybody else.
I tried that, didn't work for me.
It didn't.
So the thing evolves organically, and then you start looking at it again. And
and it just sort of swells up, and then you constantly going back. Constantly starting from the beginning until it gets big enough where that's just not practical, and you're sick of the beginning and you need to get away from it for a while.
When you sit down, say on the sorry, I'm quite interested in this the process thing. So when you sit down, say on the train, would you spend a long time in the creation of this book? Would you sit down and begin at the beginning again and read your way up to where you were and then write forward, or would you have to discipline
No, I don't
yourself?
have time. Unfortunately,
so you start where you left off.
The commute isn't that long. I wish it was longer. I wish there was another few stops there, but no, you'd have to. Otherwise, I'd never get beyond that scene.
Yeah, so you would then sit down and just pick up where you left off, or would you sort of tinker with what you did yesterday, or how does?
I tend to work I'd work on a section, however long that might be, and if that's all there is, if the book's at an early stage and all there is that section, there's nothing else, then I'd keep going over it until then. At a certain point you reach a tipping point, I guess, where it's becoming a bit more novel-like, recognizably. And then I find that I work on areas until I'm sick of them, and then I sort of move on that way, and I just keep going over and over and over and over and over and over.
I think a lot of people work that way.
I'd say so.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about your next book?
Sure. My next book is totally non-medical. It's I grew up in Dundalk, and so that whole I'm very attached to that part of the world, particularly because I don't know if I mentioned this, but I lived in America for 11 years, and just in recent years moved back to Ireland, and I just love that sort of part of the world. But the politics of that whole area is something I've become growing up, I had no knowledge of Irish history. It's like really embarrassing to admit that, I'd like real basics, like for instance, the difference between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Historically, I would have been totally ignorant of all of that. I just, so in the last few years, I've kind of got interested in that whole area. And so the next book is set during the peace process in 1994, the time of the first ceasefire. Well, it wasn't the first ceasefire, but the one that led to ultimate sort of peace and the Good Friday Agreement. But it's set in the border area in a sort of a fictionalized town that is, similar enough to Crossmaglen kind of area, and it's it tells the story of various characters who are impacted and working in that area. But what I really wanted to get across, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier, I wanted to get across the humour and the language that is particular to that part of the world. And so initially it actually started as I don't know if you've ever read The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugene. It's one of my favorite books, and it's just it's a high wire act because it's a what do you call it, first person plural. So it's narrated by it's a we narrator, and I just remember reading that book and going, oh my God, I'll just give up writing now because this guy's a genius. Yeah, it's just so high wire act is what it is, you know. And he never wavers for the entire duration of the book. So the initial impulse was to do something similar, but narrated by the community, you know, and all the knowingness and that would be present within that, and humor. I find it sort of technically difficult, so it kind of changed, you know, but it still has that sort of communal voice to it, I hope.
So are you moving now between voices, sort of under Milkwoody?
Yes, but through a third person sort of narrator, yeah.
So you've got a central narrative voice.
Yeah. But we'll see. I mean, I've literally just handed it in, so who knows?
Maybe it'll change completely.
Yeah, it'll be... it will never hear from it again. I'll have to delete
this from the tape.
Delete this bit of the YouTube broadcast, you know.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I think someone's on mic, aren't they? Someone on the mic? You're on the mic? Oh, this is Catherine.
Hi, Austin. I was just wondering, were you always interested in writing, or is it something that you took up relatively recently?
No, I was always. I had one of these amazing English teachers. You know, Sidney Peck was his name. He was a Canadian fella who came into our class in second. It was like that Dead Poets Society. It really was almost as cliched as that. You know, it just shows you what the difference a good teacher could make. You know. I used to hate English, and school essays were like, oh my God, you know, writing out rote stuff. And he came in, I think he was just a substitute teacher initially, and he got our school essays back, and he was like, oh my God, these are the most boring pieces of crap I've ever read. we were like, you know, taken aback. Wow, this is cool. A teacher who's cursing, first of all, and just really honest. And he was like, "You guys are funny," and all talking to the class. I don't see any of this in your writings. So I just took to it like a duck to water. Then, you know, and but then you know, during that was secondary school. Then college, you know, I did like probably what everybody, you know, does, writing this sort of sentimental poetry and all that nonsense. For a while, it was awful. I'm so embarrassed every time I come across anything I wrote then. But what really made a difference was I moved to New York in 2006, and I was like, well, I do want to get back into this writing. So I signed up with an organization called the Writers Studio, and they do online courses, and they're set in Greenwich Village, and I just it was just amazing. They, you know, there was something about just being set in exercise that just got me out of my own head, and I found it I just really loved it. I got to know a lot of different writers. I mean, the work of a lot of different writers that I would never have come across. And I was living in a box, literally a box in okay, well, not literally a box, but pretty much a box in Manhattan, you know, with no internet, no television, and so it just took off from then. And actually, my first book came from an exercise that we had to do an exercise of something you had witnessed, some scene you had witnessed that week, I think, and I was walking past Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, and there was a woman sitting on the ground, you know, and initially I thought she was a beggar because she had a bowl in front of her, but then I realized it wasn't a begging bowl, it was like a bowl that patients sometimes get sick in, you know, so she was just sitting on the ground. And I wrote this scene, and then the book came from that. And the scene's not even, I don't think it's even in the, I must go back and check actually. It's a few years, but I don't think it ever made the cut, you know. But so that's where that came from. Yeah, and since then, it's just been part of my life, you know.
Anyone else have a question?
Sorry, it's not a smart person question. Can you just remind me of the title and author of the SS officer book you mentioned?
Oh yes, Hubert Mingarelli. Yeah, his first. I don't know. Not his first, but I don't know what order of the books it was. It's called A Meal in Winter. Then he's got another book that is just amazing. It's just, oh my God, called Four Soldiers, I think it's called. And yeah, you come across these writers and then you're like, I've never heard of them before. And it's just a random book you pick out of the shelf in Hodges and Figgis. It just makes you feel, oh my God, what other stuff do I not know about? You know what I mean? I mean, maybe I'd say, well, you lived in France and you never heard of him. But Sean, do you know him? No, but apparently he's famous in France. You know, but
I did read about this book. And right. Put it in my basket for I'll buy it someday. But yeah.
But yeah, really amazing. Really amazing. Mm.
I think Joe had a question as well.
I was just wondering, Elske mentioned that you didn't write this in the normal style with chapters and that it felt, I don't know if you said rushed or claustrophobic. I was wondering, did you do that from the very beginning or was that something you realized along the way? Yeah, no, that good question. That was very. I'm not usually like this, you know. I'm usually very flexible, and I don't think, you know, I don't. But that was very intentional from pretty early on. Once I kind of figured out what I was trying to do, and it was actually one of the things with my editor at Granta. Usually, if she asks me to do something, I just do it. If she wants me to make it, yeah, I just do it, you know, because she's always right. But this was one thing where Bella was like, "Oh, should we divide it up?" Or there was, without being overly strict about it. But I was like, no, I want to retain that feeling of just being on call, you know, and yeah, as we were talking about, you know, the one section that doesn't take place in the hospital is very brief, and it's like coming up for air a little bit, where the narrator goes back to his family home, and it's very, very brief. It's not particularly, you know, not much of a relief, you know, but that's basically it. Everything else is very much contained within the confines of that environment, you know.
It's a funny little paragraph because it almost feels like it's already over. You know, like he goes home and then he's back in. You know, it's like, I don't know if it feels like he really gets a break at all. It's like, oh yeah, I did have a break just there, but now I'm
well, plus he knocks back a bottle of wine or something. So it's not exactly, you know, you're getting a little bit of an insight into his mental health at that stage as well, yeah.
Any other questions? Is that Betty? I don't.
Yeah. You said you're not plotting and not planning in a way, but actually the question is, when you're not plotting, are you planning ahead in your head? What you're gonna do? What is going to be like what do you say? Like the main obstacle to overcome for your character in the book? Do you have an idea when you start out writing, or does the idea come then and you work towards it, or?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I really wish the first part of your question was the truth, you know. But I find that I personally find that the hardest bit of writing. And I really struggled with with all the books, you know, in different ways. You know, I found it I don't want to say relatively easy, because that's not right either, but to get it up and running and, you know, to write dialogue and set you know, even the characters begin to come into focus relatively early on, I found, you know, or certainly it's a lot of fun sharpening them up and you know, and then they do, it's a cliche, but they do kind of come to life a little bit, not without effort. It's not easy, but all of that stuff is kind of I just find that fun. If fun is the right word, but it's not as laborious for. But I really find that plotting, like the plotting elements and what's your book about, and what my wife is a great help here, because she's very cerebral and very analytical. So she'd her typical response to a workbook that I'm working on in progress would be like, "Oh yeah, great! I love the writing and it's funny and all that, but what's it about? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What's it about? What are you trying to do? What?" And of course that's linked to plot, because that's the whole point of plot. Well, not the whole point. I mean, plot kind of it helps resolve the thing. It helps with turning the page. Although you can get away without that, I suppose. But the things that happen must, I think, happen for a reason, even if it's not like really obvious. Because that's kind of what justifies novel writing anyway, isn't it? And your exploration of that. But I find that the most difficult part, and it's usually what comes with the most pain, and usually very, very late on. Like this book the book that I've just finished and sent off, and that you might never hear of again, is I've been working on that for years. I discovered an old notebook. I think where the first few sections were like from 2012, and that's like over 10 years ago. And only in the last couple of months have I figured out what that book is about and got the plot to finally cohere and finish off. And oh man, I'm so relieved. But, yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more, if anyone has one last question.
How does the writing impact on the rest of your life, Austin, or does it?
Wow, that's a good question. You'd have to ask my wife and kids that. I write early in the morning, and also I try and make it tie in with something I'm doing anyway. So getting the dart into work, I'd be doing that anyway. Waiting for my son's soccer practice, I'd be doing that anyway. So I'm very protective of I like the family time and hanging out with my wife and kids and all of that stuff. And so I honestly don't think any of that suffers, because I wouldn't want it to, and I'm on a good thing with the routine that I have, just an hour, and it's amazing what you can get done if you do it for an hour every day. It really is, so there's that practical aspect, and then I would argue that it's kind of a positive thing, my kids see me working hard at this thing, and my daughter is 7, and I just changed my laptop recently, so she wanted my old laptop so she could start writing, so I think that's pretty cool. I wasn't doing that when I was 7. Well, there were no laptops, obviously, back then, but, and I think just having... when I'm not writing, I'm much calmer and just more at peace with the world if I'm in that routine, So I think that's probably helps as well, Yeah, that's my take on it anyway.
Thank you, Austin. That was so interesting, and I'm sorry through some weird sort of questions at you, but thank you so much. That was really
and thanks, Michelle, and thanks for having me. Yeah, it's brilliant.
And I think we're going to have more music from Wayne. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
The song of Adam and Eve. is Adam, her name is Eve. We were the first ones to live and breathe. God made the ocean, he made it blue. He said, do not eat forbidden fruit. Oh, he can see us, hear what we say. But he was resting on the seventh day. She made a serpent that afternoon. He smiled at us and we broke the rules. Come on, we're leaving, no time to waste. The Garden of Eden's no longer safe. Throw down the apple, the ship has sailed. We're on the run now, God is on our tail. I do remember, I do recall, there were no weeds there, no thorns at all. We were misguided, we were misled. We looked for good but found evil instead. Come on, we're leaving, no time to waste. The Garden of Eden's no longer safe. Throw down that apple, the ship has sailed. We're on the run now, God is on our tail. Come on, we're leaving, no time to waste. The Garden of Eden's no longer safe. Throw down the apple, the ship has sailed. We're on the run now, God is on our tail. Come on, we're leaving, no time to waste. The Garden of Eden's no longer safe. Throw down that apple, the ship has sailed. We're on the run now, God is on our tail. My name is Adam, her name is Eve. We were the first ones to live and breathe.
Have the open mic section. I think we just have one open mic, so Shay's going to come up and introduce himself and read. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shay. I'm here on behalf of the Writing and Literature program in ATU, and I've now heard multiple of the authors of the words say how they hate the poetry that they write in college, and I'm sure I'll think that way someday. But until then, I'm going to share with you a short piece inspired by a word-a-day calendar, so I hope you enjoy. It's called Peddler of the Precocious. I stand in defense of the modern-day malingerer. Should they see fit to surcease, so be it. The work was stodgy to begin with, and the boss a notorious ultra-crepidarian. Drudgery at the best of times had me in a perpetual torpor. I'm now left with a quandary. Do I flee my cubicle on the lam, or shall I resign on a more preferred note? A meddlesome manager maintained that to leave now would be a breach of contract. Please, this paperwork, these brumal calls, the embodiment of a boondoggle. I could do without the vociferous whining of entitled clients. He just wants to flaunt his eminence. If executed without the necessary sang-froid, you risk inflicting a gaffe upon yourself, though I'd much rather that than a soporific snooze of an exit. My last day in the office could only be classed as a jamboree. By this I mean we purported that any task sent our way was the responsibility of another department. Management was discombobulated, to say the least. We'd had a collective vaticination on how this might end, with a thorough browbeat from the boss. No matter, I'm free from my desk, and you can bet that I'll bimble about to my heart's content. There will be vicissitudes, naturally, but these will be balanced out by my eudaimonic pursuits.
Thanks a million, Shay, for that. That was very interesting. That was great, actually. I just want to say thanks a million to everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you to Austin and Elske, who were just provided a fascinating evening of conversation. It was very interesting. I was amazed, actually. At the beginning, I was about to introduce you as a former oncologist, because I was sure you couldn't do both jobs at one time, but you clearly are an oncologist and a writer at the same time, which is amazing. I just want to thank Studio Road for providing the tech support tonight as well, and all of you for joining us this evening. Our lineup for the next few months is looking really exciting. For March, we have Pauline McGlynn. In May, we have Daniel McLaughlin, and in April, we're having a very special tribute evening for our former county librarian, John C. McTiernan. So if you want to find out more details for our future events, you can leave your email or mobile number at the desk there, and just keep an eye on our social media platforms as well. So I just want to thank you all again for joining us. Wayne O'Connor is going to finish with a final song. Wayne, you were fantastic tonight, by the way. That second song, I loved it. It was like a Bonnie and Clyde tale. It was brilliant. So Guru Mil Maihag at everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a million. Bye.
I was just thinking, kind of like yourself, this song was written on a train. Coming back from Dublin, and I thought I was going to miss the train. And the lyric you'll hear in a minute is "You ain't coming back," or "Oh, I'm not going to get back," is what I had in my head. And I got in the train and started writing. And of course, I was trying not to be imposing on other people's privacy and everything, so I was doing it really quietly. I was sitting there going, because when you get these ideas, maybe that's well with writers, and when you get an idea, you gotta grab it, because it might just go, so you gotta get it down. So I hadn't planned playing this, but I'm gonna give it now. That's your fault now, I'm playing this. I'd walk 1,000,000 miles until my feet are sore. I'd give everything I had and a little bit more. If I could see you walking through that door, if I could guide you around the old dance floor, I'd walk across red hot coals for you. I'd hold my breath until my face was blue. If I could see you once in my point of view, I'd trade these days alone for an hour with you. But you ain't coming back now, are you? You ain't coming back now, are you? You ain't coming back now, are you? I'm finally gonna have to face the cold hard truth. You ain't coming back now, are you? Like a faithful hound I would gladly follow. Ooh, the hardest pill that a man can swallow is to be this empty and this hollow. Won't you please come back and just ease this sorrow? Yeah, throw me a rope, throw me a line, because I feel like I'm drowning half of the time. I'd give everything I had if I could change your mind and have you lay back into my arms one time. You ain't coming back now, are you? You ain't coming back now, are you? You ain't coming back now, are you? I'm finally gonna have to face the cold hard truth. You ain't coming back now, are you? And I can see now where I went wrong. I gave you reason to just move on. You ain't coming back from where you're gone. And you ain't coming back now, are you? You ain't coming back now, are you? You ain't coming back now, are you? I'm finally gonna have to face the cold hard truth. You ain't coming back now, are you? Thanks very much.